Hey everyone, welcome to the next to the last week of the semester. I know the final exam is next week, but before we get there, here in week 7, we do have two additional kind of final topics to discuss. So I'm going to talk about both of them here in this video. As far as chapter 15 goes, that is managing HR globally. We've spent the rest of the semester talking about the individual functions within HR. So we've talked about compensation and benefits. We talked about union management relations, training and development, all those other topics we've discussed. Now, chapter 15 kind of talks about how we take all of those elements and we manage it on a global level. So, if we have employees, outside the United States, whether that's temporary or permanent, or, if our company has like branch offices or manufacturing units in other countries, that's kind of how do we would still be one company. So how do we manage, employees who have different, cultural identities, countries and workers who have different, views of work and things like overtime and working on weekends and nights and all those things, different benefits in different types of countries, all that factors in to how we look at human resources globally. So Chapter 15 starts off pretty early by talking about Hofstede's cultural dimensions. Now, this is probably a term or something that maybe you've seen in other classes. If you've ever taken any sociology or psychology, Hofstede, his ideas really influenced, those areas, and they've kind of made their way over into management and organizational behavior and things like that. So, but Hofstede's cultural, dimensions talk about things like, power distances between cultures. Is a culture more masculine or more feminine focused? Do they have a more long-term or short-term focus? So make sure you read through the section on those cultural dimensions and kind of learn, different countries can have different focuses on what are important. Obviously here in the United States, we have our own focuses in those areas. So make sure you kind of read about that. So one really important page that I want to draw your attention to, I have it right here. It's page 689 in your textbook. If you see it right here, it talks about, managing employees in the global context. And it talks about in the different types of international employees, where, we have things like host countries, and you probably heard the term expatriate and host country national. There's a slew of different terms right there. Make sure you study this section very closely. I think there's at least 2, if not 3 questions on the final exam about this section. So again, I want to make sure you understand, when we use the term expatriate or we use the term host country national, what does that mean? Does that mean, like an American citizen working abroad, like in Japan, for example, or, if we have an American who maybe works for a Japanese company as opposed to an American company, or, maybe somebody who lives in Australia but works for an American company, all those matter as far as the terminology. So make sure you study page 689 and those different definitions of international employees, because it's very important for the final exam. So. And speaking of expatriates, I think, the chapter kind of ends with a discussion about, how do we reacculturate expatriates when they come back? So let's say you're an American and you get sent over to Europe for 3 years, and then you go to China for 2 years, and then after 5 years of being overseas, now you come back to the United States. Well, obviously that's a huge adjustment, going from, different rules and different, work ethics and different, benefit options in a foreign country versus the U.S. So how do we reacclimate somebody, excuse me, to American culture? That's a really important aspect that I want to make sure that you pay very close attention to. Excuse me. So that's kind of the main things I want you to take away from chapter 15. It's a very important chapter that kind of summarizes everything that we've talked about, all semester long, and just makes it more of a global perspective. So again, very important chapter. Make sure you read through it. And finally, chapter 16, strategically managing the HR function, is kind of the final, obviously the last chapter of our semester. It kind of, redefines why organizations, companies have HR and the importance of it. So one additional page I do want to draw your attention to that I have right here is figure 16.1. So if you see this, it's this pyramid right here that you see. So with that, that's kind of how, most HR, organizations spend most of their time. 65 to 70% of the time is more transactional. It's entering time clocks. It's making sure somebody's benefits are updated. It's posting a job. It's processing somebody's pay raise. It's all very transactional. And most people think of HR in that manner. Like, well, HR is where I go to sign up for my benefits, or it's where I go for new hire orientation. Things along those lines. And while those are obviously, it's 65 to 75% of the time, it's incredibly important. But at the same time, you also have to realize that that's just the basics. That's not where HR gets its transformation. You see that there was 15 to 30% in traditional, where we're looking at things like, changing our compensation pay rates, or maybe, engaging in more definitive training, or working on employee relations, where like maybe we have to write somebody up for not following company policy, et cetera, et cetera. Again, that's more of this starting to get more strategic. That's where the daily decisions we make are what's impacting the business daily, as opposed to kind of those other things. And only 5 to 15% of the times that truly transformational, where we're changing company culture. We're looking at, improving long-term development of our employees. And this is where HR has its, true value. And again, this is something that I hope that you've learned throughout the semester, that HR truly is, designed to be transformational in and of itself. Even though it's known for kind of those day-to-day interactions, this really important aspect of changing a company's culture is really what it's all about. Excuse me. So how do we define success within HR? There's different approaches we can take. And I think your book talks about a couple of different approaches. One's like an audit approach, an analytic approach. But essentially, how do we know that we're having impact? We look at things like our retention, how long it takes to hire somebody, the amount of applications we're getting, are people actually using the benefits that we offer? So there's a million different ways that HR can measure success. And every company is different, and every organization is different. Whenever you get into a full-time, role, or even if you're in a role right now, most HR departments, tend to kind of focus on a couple of things that's more important for them than other aspects. If you work for, a company like Anheuser-Busch, in St. Louis, obviously from an HR standpoint, it's at the global beer market's incredibly competitive. So, you have to spend tons of time in developing your employees and adding long-term value to them, so they don't leave to go to one of AB's competitors. So, every organization is different, so make sure you kind of understand how HR measures success. And a lot of times, as this is more true in smaller companies, but also can be true in large organizations, that you may not have a large HR team. A lot of bigger organizations obviously have massive HR departments where they can all have one group just focus on training, or one group just focus on employment, or et cetera, et cetera. But in smaller organizations where you might have somebody who's a generalist, somebody who handles a lot of kind of more different aspects, maybe does a little bit of everything, a jack of all trades, if you will. You may not have there's not enough time to be able to do all these things. So a lot of times we might, source out or outsource some functions, whether, hire another company to do our payroll, hire another company to oversee our benefits, hire another company to do all of our compensation for us. That's becoming increasingly popular, especially again in smaller organizations where they may not have the budget or the manpower to be able to do all of this. And finally, the last topic I kind of want to briefly mention is about the future of HR. I think there's two ways that we're going to have a very strategic future. First off is technology. There are so many different ways that technology has really pushed us. Like for example, I've seen companies now do what we call virtual interviews, where they send you a link and then you video record. They give you a list of questions and you video record yourself answering those, and then you send it back, and the recruiter then evaluates your responses. I mean, you could send it out to, many, many different people instead of bringing them all into the office. That really increases speed and efficiency. So technology is a wonderful thing. And also the analytics that go behind it. Companies are able to provide HR organizations with, tools that get down to, okay, you're more likely to see somebody apply from this zip code. So maybe you want to focus your recruitment areas there. Or, you have all these benefits and people are using X, Y, and Z, but A, B, and C, they're not even touching. So maybe we should not, evaluate those further. So the analytics are kind of, and technology are really the future of HR. And if you continue to follow HR throughout your career, you will start to see these changes over time. Well, that's all for these chapters. That's the end of the course from a chapter perspective. I'll post some more information in our weekly overview video. But thank you so much, and best of luck on the final exam.